Hi, I'm Dr. Liz Carter, and welcome to video 2 of my free 3-part series, Figuring Out Your Food Allergies. So if you missed video 1, you probably want to go back and check that out. That's all about what food allergies actually are and how to test for them. And today we're going to dive into my favorite treatment for food allergies. Okay, so let's dive right in here to part 2 of the video series, how to do an elimination diet. So in the last video, we established that doing an elimination diet is the best way to test for food sensitivities and intolerances, which are by far the most prevalent type of food issue that people have. Food allergies are technically defined as that IgE hypersensitivity reaction that causes potential anaphylactic shock. So not nearly as common as things that are these kind of vague symptoms that can affect all different parts of the body. Yeah, so that's why an elimination diet can be so helpful, because we learned that the testing methods, right, only test for an allergic response specifically for food allergies and food sensitivities, and that there really isn't a great test for food intolerances besides a little specific one where there are very few practitioners trained in it that we covered last time. So an elimination diet is cheap. I believe I said it was easy. I think it's easy in theory. It's very difficult in practice depending on what's going on for you. But it will often get you the best and most clear results out of anything, and it's something that you don't need anybody else to do. You can start experimenting immediately, which is why I love it, right? And again, I love suggesting the elimination diet because it puts the power back into your hands as the patient or the person who wants to improve their diet. I think far too often we look to lab tests to validate what we're feeling or to tell us what's wrong with us, instead of actually looking internally and doing that hard work to say, you know, what is really irritating me? How can I find that out myself? How can I start listening? Because most of the time, we just really, really don't want to listen. Our body is usually being pretty clear that there's something wrong, but we just don't like listening, right? Because we like our habits, we like our lifestyle, we like our diet choices. Sometimes there's even, you know, an endorphin rush we get from certain foods we eat. You know, there is this biochemical as well as mental and emotional attachment to certain foods. So a test can, you know, is this external impetus, right? It can tell us something that we are failing to recognize in ourselves. And sometimes that's necessary. But again, all the tests will lead you back to an elimination diet. And the elimination diet, I think, is very empowering. You are in control, you're listening, you're figuring out what's wrong. And that, again, is truly the core of naturopathic medicine. And that's truly my goal and mission for you, is to help you learn how to listen to your body better so you can heal at this deep level, addressing the root rather than just addressing symptoms. So, okay, let's dive into how to do an elimination diet. So, an overview of the video. We'll cover what is an elimination diet, why should you do an elimination diet, which we talked about a little bit, but then also why you shouldn't do an elimination diet, because that's also really important to understand. How long do you eliminate things, right? So we're getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of what to do. What do you typically eliminate? I'll cover that as best I can. Again, that's pretty variable. And then how to reintroduce foods. This is the part of the elimination diet that is talked about the least, because it's called the elimination diet. It's talking about taking foods out, whereas this reintroduction part is by far the most challenging step. And can be valuable and cannot be. So we'll get into that as well, and why or why not you may want to consider doing that part. Okay, so one thing I wanted to highlight here, it's a little frustrating for me that they call it the elimination diet, which is why I put it in quotes. I do understand that that's a very easy term for people to wrap their head around, and diet usually means some sort of shift in the way that you're eating, right? Whether it be taking out certain food groups or shifting calories or shifting the time that you're eating, anything like that, right? However, I think a diet also has this very restrictive feel, which I get it, it's the elimination diet, but bear with me, we'll get into some good stuff about that. a restrictive feel, and then also an impermanent feel, right? That it's a temporary thing. And I think it's really, really important to understand that when you embark on this elimination diet, it's really about lifestyle change. It's about really getting into things and potentially letting go of these foods that have been causing you issues for decades, and just leaving them out of your life. That's not always the problem. I know, don't turn off the video yet. It's not always how it goes, but a lot of times it is a significant period of time that you need to be away from that food. Months to years, and then over time you learn that maybe you just don't even want it in there at all. That's the beauty of this elimination diet and change, is that it is a constant negotiation. No one does this perfectly, and I don't think it should be done perfectly. It should never just be cold turkey, it's out forever. That's very rarely how it works. And then every time something slips back in, you learn something about yourself. You learn how your body reacts, you learn how you feel, you learn how much you want that food in your diet again, based on how badly it feels. You learn the situations that are worth it to you to have that and not, and often that evolves over time. So again, this is all the process of learning to listen to your body and understand what it's saying to you. And it's always, like I said, it's always a negotiation. It's always, do I want to deal with these symptoms that happen by having this food, or is it not worth it to me? And that evolves. So it is a lifestyle change. It's a long-term process. So that's something to be really aware of before you go into an elimination diet, that it is a commitment, and it's much more effective if you have that mindset. And that's why sometimes, especially for people if they're not ready, I don't recommend that we jump into it right away. You really have to be ready. You can jump in, but then I think there's an expectation for yourself that you need to think about, like, wow, okay, this might not work out, because mentally I know that I am not ready to completely let go of this. Some people need to see how much they improve, and then they have the intent of just immediately going back to what they were doing. But over time you will kind of learn how much it's worth to you, and that lifestyle change is really where you need to end up if you want to feel significantly better. Oftentimes, right? And remember, not all the symptoms are always related to food allergies. Always great to check with your local practitioner, medical doctor, naturopath, whoever, to check out those symptoms and make sure that there isn't a larger underlying cause for what's going on. Food allergies are really mostly related to chronic symptoms and issues that have been there for years or decades, that you're interested in potentially resolving with diet. Okay, all right, let's jump on in here. So why would we want to do an elimination diet? So as we mentioned before, right, the symptoms in video number 1, which can be related to GI stuff, right? We talked about diarrhea, constipation, nausea, gas and bloating, cramping, but it can also relate to a much wider variety of symptoms, right? Where we get into nervous system dysfunction with insomnia or stress, feeling like you're wired all the time. We get into mood issues where we've got fatigue and lethargy with energy, and then we've got anxiety, depression, anger, any kind of type of emotional spectrum issue. We've also got muscle and joint pain that might be related, skin issues, all kinds of these things that might be part of a food allergy issue. Your body does not just create these. I think that's something we haven't kind of trained to think about Western medicine wise, because if we have these vague symptoms, nobody can really offer us any answers. But why on earth would the body make you uncomfortable for no reason? That doesn't make any sense. From a naturopathic perspective, we believe that the body is inherently intelligent. It has a healing force its own. It's called the vital force, or the vis, and its own innate ability to heal. And you can see that if you cut your hand, for instance, and it heals on its own, right? We're not directing it. We're not telling it how to heal. It just does it. And that principle can be applied throughout the entire body. If you give it a shot, it will do it, right? So symptoms are also very energy expensive. They're quite intense to produce. It takes a lot of energy that your body would probably much rather spend repairing, digesting, sleeping, all of these wonderful things that help you maintain health. But if something is out of balance enough that it is creating these symptoms to get your attention, that's telling you, wow, I really need to pay attention to this, right? There's so much energy being put towards that's creating this headache or this joint pain, rather than actually me being kind of balanced and healthy and healing. It's something important to pay attention to. It's never random. The body doesn't just create it. There's always a root cause to it. And that's part of why the elimination diet and looking at these larger food changes can be so massively life-changing for people, if that's really at the root of what's going on for them. So we're looking at healing your GI and decreasing inflammation overall. Those are some great benefits of the elimination diet, right? We talked about in the last video with leaky gut potentially, where we've got so much inflammation over time, it actually allows food particles to migrate across that should not. And then those kind of settle in either joints or the nervous system or whatever else and create those systemic symptoms. So if we take out the irritant, our GI can heal. Again, that's that innate healing property of the body. If you remove the irritant, the body will clean it up. It's a beautiful process. And that's what's so amazing about the elimination diet too, is that people who have been eating or drinking something that's been irritating them for decades, if they take it out of their diet, your body can literally shift and downregulate and get rid of those symptoms within days. Which, if you think about it, is amazing. After years and years of this inflammatory input, that is how much your body wants to heal. And as soon as that trigger is removed, it does it, right? It's pretty amazing when you think about it. It's fantastic. And then decreasing inflammation overall, right? That's how we get to that lowering that inflammation load. Our body can actually heal, and then if there's not irritants, it doesn't need to produce more inflammation to cause more symptoms to get our attention, right? The louder the symptoms are, the more we're not paying attention, and oftentimes the less we want to pay attention, so the body just continues to yell and yell and yell. We want to resolve, if possible, sensitivities and intolerances, right? Like we talked about in the other video. Usually sensitivities are the easier ones to resolve, that immune reaction, because it doesn't always have to react if we get that inflammation level down, depending on what's going on. Intolerances could be either way, right? An intolerance is that you really don't have that mechanism to actually digest the food. So, if you're lactose intolerant, you're never going to actually, produce that lactase enzyme. But if there are other intolerances that maybe aren't linked to that, maybe they are caused by this inflammatory picture, then those intolerances might be able to resolve. So it all depends, but these are great reasons to try to dive into the elimination diet. So let's look at why not is a good idea, why it's not a good idea to do an elimination diet. So as a cleanse, which I put in quotes again, cleanses are very frustrating. I did talk about them in my best way to detox video, which I specifically say is not via a cleanse or supplement, so feel free to check that out if you'd like. I'll put a link to it below the video for you. But the cleanses are really, again, it's a short-term fix, and that's not what this is about. This is a massive lifestyle change. Doesn't have to be massive, but often can be. With great results. But it reminded me of this because my husband and I were talking, and he had seen a post in his Facebook feed about a girl doing Whole30, which is a form, it's kind of like an elimination diet. They do take out a lot of similar things, but they don't really brand it as an elimination diet. And she was posting about, oh my gosh, I'm in the last 2 days of my Whole30 and I can't wait to eat like donuts and coffee, in 2 days. And we were both like, all right, that's not really how it works, right? That's not the point. If you've taken things out and you're feeling better, why would you want to add them back in, right? And that's that really short-term cleanse mentality that like for 7 days or 30 days, I'm going to take this out of my diet, I'm going to cleanse so I have less burden, and then I can just add things back in, it'll be fine, right? That's not how it works. It never works that way. If you have a constant irritant, it is going to continue irritating the body. It depends on how large that irritant is and how many other irritants are in the system. But I just wanted to emphasize that that is not the point of an elimination diet. It's not this short-term fix. You can do it that way, you know, if you mentally know that you're going to kind of add things back in, but at least be open to learning about why you feel better with that. You know, and consider doing a reintroduction as well, which we'll get to at the end. So, and also not really looking at the elimination diet for weight loss. In my last video, I did say that, you know, unintended weight gain can be caused by food sensitivities and intolerances, but weight loss should never be the primary goal, right? It should really be, I want to be healthier, I want to feel better, I want to get rid of these other symptoms. Oftentimes, weight loss is the last thing to shift if we've got larger pictures going on, larger issues, just because, you know, the weight that our body retains is looked at as a resource, right? It's energy that can be burned for fuel. So if we're deficient in some ways, or we're fighting other battles with chronic inflammation, there's no way the body's going to want to let go of that weight, because it looks at it as like, hey, I've got this energy reserve in case I need more, because I'm devoting so much energy to these other things. I need that there as a resource in case, right? So weight loss will happen, but again, it's usually the last thing that happens, which is frustrating, I understand, but it's also nice to know that if it does happen, wow, you have really healed up a lot of other issues that were going on internally. So it can happen on an elimination diet, but it's not a great thing to look at as this is why I want to do it, especially since, you know, if that's your if that's your primary goal, and it doesn't happen on the timetable you think it should happen on, then you'll say, oh no, the elimination diet didn't work for me. And that's not true. It's just that your body was cleaning up some other things, most likely, if you have some food sensitivities and intolerances. And again, that weight takes a very long time to shift sometimes for people, depending on individual metabolism and all kinds of other things. So yeah, not a primary goal. It can happen, hang in there, but probably not the first thing to shift for you. Okay, so how long do we want to do the elimination diet? So we want to do it a minimum of 6 weeks. And if you're my patient watching this, I'm sorry, I usually hedge my bets. I get really nervous telling people 6 weeks because it's a long time. I usually say like 4 weeks or 3 weeks if you can, but truthfully, 6 weeks, and I will endeavor to just do that more so. Anyway, a little bit, I feel really bad for people because I do understand that this is a very difficult thing to do. I totally get that, and I try to really approach it with a lot of compassion and empathy, because I've eliminated a ton of food allergies myself and had a long road to figure out what my actual irritants are, and I'm probably still in the process, but you know, I understand that it's a difficult thing to do. So 6 weeks though, really, if you can commit to it, fabulous. And gluten really does need to be out, especially that long, because it tends to have really far-reaching effects on the nervous system in particular. You often see positive shifts before this point in your symptoms, but the idea is as well that we bring down that inflammatory load. It gets to a new normal, which, you know, the old normal's here, new normal's way down here, which is great. And then you actually allow your GI to heal if you continue to avoid those foods for at least 6 weeks. And for some people, this isn't enough. It depends on what's going on. Again, what the total body burden is, how long the inflammation's going on, what else is inflamed, what's being suppressed by medications potentially. It's very complex, and that's why it's really lovely to have somebody help guide you through it, or, you know, to do research on your own and get some books or watch these videos or whatever you find helpful to help you move through this process, because it is not always clear or easy. You know, the body's not cut and dry that way. So really trying for the 6 weeks. And then you do want to follow your symptoms. That is the most important thing. If you are still having symptoms after 6 weeks that you believe are related to food allergies or sensitivities, you need to keep that food out longer. So it's really important. This is the end all be all. Timelines are arbitrary with this thing, right? Our whole point in doing the elimination diet is to resolve some of these long-term chronic symptoms that may be related to food allergies or sensitivities and tolerances, right? So if your symptoms have not shifted as much or completely, ideally we want to see them completely resolve in that time. So if they've shifted, great, you're on the right track, that's fabulous, but you definitely want to wait until things are totally quieted down. And it might be that maybe you didn't eliminate everything you needed to, or that there's just a lot of stuff to move on out that your body's working on. So just respect that process for yourself. And again, really, if you're looking at this as a lifestyle change, that should not be a problem, right? The time frame. It should be, okay, great, that's when I should start to, have resolved most of my symptoms or have seen the most improvement by that point, which is probably true for most people. But since it's a lifestyle change, you should be mentally prepared to be on this for 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever works. Not without exception, but, that's okay, just looking at the big picture that way. Okay, so what do we eliminate? So this is a big list. Hold on. Don't get too worried. So this I took from one of my favorite books that I will share with you at the end. It is called The Elimination Diet. Pretty simple. And he said through clinically and through a lot of his own research, he is a clinical nutritionist, these are the biggest ones that came up. I do really agree with this list. The ones that I have starred are the ones that I recommend the most to my patients. So that's kind of my elimination diet. You can see it's a little bit less comprehensive than his. If you want to go full on comprehensive, fabulous. That is wonderful. You're probably going to get the best results, if I'm being honest, if you do all of that. I just find this a little bit difficult for people, especially the gluten and the dairy, because they're in everything, right? And if you're eating processed foods, sugar and corn are in so much. And that's the hard part about the elimination diet. Once you really start looking at this, pretty much all convenience foods go away. So that's something you really have to look at. Even at my natural grocery store, something that's gluten-free will have dairy in it or eggs in it, and something that's dairy-free will have gluten in it or soy. So it's tough. There's not always a lot of food allergy consciousness, especially if you're looking at all of these. Usually people choose one and then they fill it in with the others, other allergens. So you do have to be really careful and just realize that it is going to be a lot of food prep for yourself, and that, that's a big change for a lot of people. So the really important thing here too is if you have things that you suspect you are sensitive to, take them out. If they're on this list, if they're not on this list. I didn't really include any nightshades on here, which nightshades, the typical symptom pattern that goes along with them is joint pain. And nightshades again are eggplants, potato, pepper, tomato. So if you have joint and muscle pain, nightshades are a really good one to look at. Not always the case, for joint pain and nightshades all the time, but a lot of the time it is. So again, this is where it gets kind of individually complex, right? Because you are not a cookbook. It's not A plus B equals C. It is listening to yourself and figuring out what can happen. And I think part of this too is that I will talk to people about not doing all of these at once, right? Instead, adding them over time. So that's another option as well. So you can do that. It's just that 6-week minimum needs to be there. All things need to be out for a minimum of 6 weeks. But you don't have to do it just in 6 weeks, right? You can do it over the course of 3 months if you need to. If it takes a long time to get gluten out, okay, that's fine. Once you've got gluten out, move on to the next one and take that out. That I find sometimes is a little bit more manageable for people, especially with families or if they're really busy. It can be just really tough and overwhelming to do all of this at once. So you can, kind of put things in over or take things out over time, but you just have to be conscious of getting to a point where you have everything out, and then that's your start clock for the 6 weeks or so. So again, follow what you think you might be sensitive to on this list. You can do all of them. You can do just the ones I have starred. Figure out what you think might be an issue. The ones I have starred I see are the most common that I've seen for people and have the largest reaction. The other way to do this too is, some people like this, not many, but it's for a select few that really enjoy, like they just want this simplified. They don't want anything else going on. They just want to know what they can eat, right? And we're going to get to a little bit more of that as well. So there's an elimination diet that's only 4 foods. And they're typically non-allergenic foods. So lamb, sweet potato, I believe a type of bean, usually adzuki is a good one, and then pear. So those 4 foods tend to make up your entire diet for the 6 weeks. That is a little rough for most people. It can be tough. Yeah, I think beans or quinoa maybe. I'll look it up for you to write it down. But that is kind of for the people that just don't want to mess with it and want to know exactly what they can eat. It would be a little tiresome, but sometimes people want to do that. So you can go this route and kind of parse things out this way, or you can do that, kind of 4 food elimination diet as well. So, okay, what do I eliminate? We've covered that, right? These are the big ones. Alcohol just tends to be inflammatory. Adding on top of that, coffee tends to be extremely inflammatory for people. And it's really important to maybe take a look at those, just because, again, with this, we are trying to lower the inflammatory load enough. And if we don't lower it enough, we're still going to have symptoms. So it is really important. Coffee, especially for women, can be very irritating to the reproductive system. So it is something to consider. So take this in, see what makes sense to you, see what's doable, develop a plan that is doable for yourself, whether that's going all in at once and taking it all out, or if you need to kind of do it over time, that's also acceptable, right? Again, this is all about learning about yourself and what your symptoms are like. Okay, so one part I really want to focus on, because it's called the elimination diet, we don't often focus on what can you eat, right? There's a lot you can eat. This looked like this is a big list, right? But there's so much that is not in these food groups or part of these foods that you can eat, and they're just less eaten by people, I think, because these foods that you eliminate are most often easily put in packaged and convenience foods. These foods generally require a little bit more prep for yourself. And that's kind of all what the elimination diet is too, right? You not only feel better, but you learn to cook. So 2 for 1, it's good. But I just wanted to focus on a few of maybe the new things that you would be eating or putting in your diet. So you don't feel like, oh my God, what do I eat? And the books that I'm going to share with you really help out with that quite a bit too. But I just wanted to give you a little preview here. So grains. My favorite grains are rice, oats, and quinoa. People tend to do pretty well on all of those. Quinoa is lovely. It's high in protein. It's very quick to make. It's only about 15 minutes of prep time. It's high in protein, so that's really lovely. You don't often have to add any other protein to it. It keeps well. It's easy to take places. It does absorb a lot of flavor when you cook with it, so just FYI, maybe some more seasoning with it. Rice, I really like rice, unless you have some blood sugar issues, which usually are not triggered by rice unless you're eating just rice by itself. So yeah, rice with protein and fat, totally fine. I actually prefer jasmine rice or white rice, and jasmine especially, to brown rice. Brown rice can be very harsh on the colon, and the bran that we think is good and healthy for us, it can be irritating to the colon, and it actually takes more nutrients to break down and get to that inner kernel than it gives to us. So I usually encourage people to do white rice, and in particular, little bonus tip, I like to cook it with some oil. There's a really interesting article that came out that I'll try to link to that shows that that's usually how it's traditionally prepared, with either oil or butter. And it decreases the glycemic load of the rice, and it kind of changes the structure of the carbohydrates a bit. I'm probably saying that wrong, but it does. It changes the way we absorb and digest it, which I thought was super fascinating. So I always cook it with a couple tablespoons of fat now. And oats. So oats, when you look up gluten-free resources, oats are always listed as having gluten. However, oats are they don't inherently have gluten. It's just that oftentimes they're processed in a gluten-containing facility. So there are versions of oats that are gluten-free oats. So you could certainly get gluten-free oats. My favorite brand is Bob's Red Mill for that. They do a great job with old-fashioned rolled oats or steel-cut oats. But oats are wonderful, and especially if we're looking at a GI that's been inflamed, they're super soothing and nourishing and healing to the GI. So oatmeal is one of my very favorite foods for people on the elimination diet. Making sure you get some protein and fat in there too. So fat, right? Fat, almost any type of fat, great on the elimination diet besides, dairy fat usually and the fat in eggs. So ghee is a really important one to look at. So ghee is just clarified butter. It's available at most natural grocery stores, and it comes in a lot of different flavors now. I'll put a link to my favorite one at the end for you. But because it's clarified butter, it has the allergenic substances from dairy filtered out. So it's clarified. It is not going to be reactive for you. So it's a really nice kind of solid animal fat substitute for you. You could also do duck fat, rendered duck fat. I didn't write that one down, but delicious. A little earthier, but also really rich and unctuous and lovely. The elimination diet is not about lowering fat content and just eating lots of carbs, right? Which we think about as healthy eating. Not at all. I'm actually a big fan of a lot of fat for people. And one thing I forgot to mention too about the elimination diet is that it has absolutely nothing to do with calories. There's no calorie restriction we're talking about, and I would really advise you not to do that because calorie restriction lowers your basal metabolic rate, so you're going to be burning less calories anyway. So yeah, and in the future I hope to do a couple of videos about that, so stay tuned. But yeah, so the elimination diet is not anything about calories. We're just looking at foods. Oftentimes calories are affected because you're eating a totally different quality, right? And the elimination diet is also of the mindset that a calorie in is not just a calorie out. There are different qualities of calories as well, right? There's empty calories we get from processed junk food that causes inflammation and some of these allergic symptoms we might have. And then there's the nutrient-dense calories from these foods we're going to talk about that are really anti-inflammatory, soothing, and healing. So that's what we're focusing on a little bit more here too. So again, non-traditional diet. So yeah, ghee, duck fat, olive oil, avocado, great, fabulous. Avocado will be your best friend. Coconut will be really your best friend, like best buds, especially with dairy out. There are so many recipes on the internet for substituting dairy with coconut because it's non-allergenic, right? A lot of people think, oh, if dairy's out, I'm going to go to soy. And soy is actually quite allergenic for most people. So moving down the list, and then rice, like rice milk it's basically sugar. It has very little nutritional value for you. Almond milk can be great, but full-fat coconut milk is richer and thicker and delicious and satiating because it's higher in fat. So really lovely. And I have a chocolate coconut pudding that's elimination diet friendly if you're not taking chocolate out. That I will link to as well. So, and then we've got fish, right? The cold water fish, especially the fatty fish like salmon and cod. You want to make sure they're wild caught because the farmed fish are extremely high in omega-6s and very inflammatory fat. So wild caught fish only, but even looking at the smaller, oilier fishes would be fabulous, like anchovy, sardines, smelt, mackerel. All of these things would be fabulous to add in, and other types of fish too. You just want to be mindful of the mercury content in fish with those big ones like tuna, especially swordfish, Chilean sea bass. Off the top of my head, those are all larger fish, so they have larger amount of mercury. Generally, the smaller the fish, the less accumulation of heavy metals and mercury. So, and then we've got meat as well, right? We only took out beef and pork potentially, so we still got chicken, which I would encourage you to do chicken thighs or roast a chicken or eat it with the skin on, all that good fat for satiation. Lamb, lovely and fatty and rich. So yeah, those are just a couple examples, but those are great. Okay, more of what you can eat, right? Veggies, whole category of food. So many vegetables you've probably never explored. Leafy greens, I think we think of course, with lettuce, and you know, we get into kale and chard and all that, and I think people kind of get that. I think that's probably the impression of the elimination diet is just eating kale all the time. I do eat kale, and you do eat kale in the elimination diet, but it does not have to be the end-all be-all of your vegetable consumption, and it shouldn't be. And we got root vegetables, right? Would be fabulous. Sweet potatoes, totally fine. Sweet potato and potato are not related in the way that they would cause a reaction. So if you have to take nightshades out, sweet potatoes totally fine. It's just white potato that you want out, and purple potato. Root vegetables, explore these, right? We've got celery root, which tastes like celery. We've got turnips. We've got beets, parsnips, rutabaga. All of this stuff that maybe you've heard your grandparents have cooked and you've never touched. Delicious and great, and these different starches from root vegetables really do wonders for the bacteria in our large intestine and helping them to ferment foods properly into great fatty acids that we need. So yeah, so root vegetables are great. Herbs, right? We've got a wide selection, very flavorful and delicious, so feel free to use those as much as possible. Squash is another great example. Butternut, you know, summer squash, all that good stuff. And cruciferous veggies. So we've got the brassica family, right? The kale, the broccoli, the cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. I especially love cabbage. And I just did a video on sauerkraut that you can check out. I will link to you. But fermented foods would be a fabulous addition to the elimination diet because, again, they're very GI healing and anti-inflammatory. So yeah, so plenty more veggies that I didn't mention, but there's a ton that we can experiment with, right? And then fruit as well. Most fruit, you know, we did say maybe we want to get rid of citrus on the elimination diet, but most fruit is fine, right? Like melon, apples, pears, berries, especially bananas, all kinds of stuff. Again, experiment with some fruits that maybe you've never gotten to eat. Mango, papaya. Those are nice because they're a little more calorically dense than some of the other fruits. But there's so much to look at and experiment with when you do the elimination diet. It's pretty amazing. And again, the books that I will show you really give you a lot of good recipes to follow and to see how this goes for you, right? You're not going to be on your own. I'm not just going to like throw out all these all these foods and just put them together, you know? There are recipes that you can follow, and then it's great, right? I think it's very frustrating to look up recipes and then try to take things out and adapt them rather than just starting with a recipe that's gluten, dairy, soy, egg, whatever else free. It's way better that way and so much more satisfying. I think you'll really enjoy doing that. Okay, so, right. Last step is the reintroduction phase. So this one can be pretty complicated. Again, it's not always cut and dry. So it's really important to be patient and to listen as much as you can to your body. And this is also one that you don't have to do. Some people just feel way better and they're like, I am leaving this stuff out. I'm not messing with it. We're done here. However, if you do want to know what you're sensitive to or how sensitive you are to it, this is a good way to go. Especially, you know, social engagements will come up. Sometimes it's nice to know, can I eat anything there, or should I just plan on bringing my own food, which is a very real thing to do. So, okay, let's dive into reintroduction. So how do I reintroduce, right? This is only after the minimum 6 weeks or your symptoms are gone. That you want to reintroduce things. So you do one food at a time. This is really important. This is not a, I want to reintroduce something, so I'm going to reintroduce birthday cake. That's not a good way to go, right? Because that probably has gluten, dairy, corn, soy, sugar, eggs, everything in it. So you really have to be diligent and eat this food in the purest state possible. So if it's an egg, literally an egg, right? Dairy is particularly difficult because it's 3 components that you might want to test. We've got lactose, which is highest in soft dairy products like soft cheeses, milk, yogurt, ice cream. We got casein, which is highest in hard cheeses. And we got whey, right? So sometimes you're going to want to test all of those separately. So you can see this reintroduction phase can be very frustrating because it takes a long time with all these different components. So you're going to want to choose, and I will put a list for you at the end, what typical food reintroductions look like in terms of quantity, because we're going to talk about you want to eat a good quantity, and then when you want to do it. The timing is usually you want to eat it 10 to 15 minutes before your meal, because the idea with the reintroduction is that we are creating a reaction, right? We want to see if we're going to react to this food. So there's no like nibbling and then saying, oh, I'm fine. I didn't react at all. Not true, right? Because it could cause a low level of inflammation, and then you're going to have false information. You're going to start eating the food, and then 2 weeks later, you're going to be like, why do I feel awful, right? The elimination diet didn't work. I don't get it. Not true. It's just that, reintroduction is tricky, and you do have to eat a fair amount of it, so that really means like an ounce of cheese or an entire egg or a slice of wheat bread. It's not a small amount of food usually. So we want to eat a good quantity of food 3 times a day. So you're really trying to trigger this reaction. And you can see why some people want to skip this, because that's really uncomfortable, right? Why would you want to recreate the symptoms that have gone and you feel better? So, again, it's a very individual decision, and maybe you're only going to test certain things because you're sure you react to some things and you're not quite sure about others, so you might as well test the others. And then you want to eat it 3 times a day unless you react. If you react with the first egg that you have a day or whatever it is, like don't kill yourself and try to eat it 3 times a day. We know there's a reaction. That's the whole point of reintroduction, right? So this is the hardest part of reintroduction, is that oftentimes we do not have that immediate reaction. Remember, with food sensitivities and intolerances, it's usually a delayed response, which means it can be delayed up to 72 hours and sometimes longer. So you have to watch for the return of your symptoms. That's what that stands for, symptoms. So whatever that is, whatever physical things you've been tracking, right, which is always a really nice idea to do. And I would highly recommend kind of a log of your reactions when you reintroduce. You want to note, what time you ate things, your mood, how much water you were drinking, if you're feeling sick, what symptoms come back in, because all of this can affect the reintroduction. And sometimes your reintroduction symptoms, you feel sick, and then you don't know, am I getting a cold or was this from a food? And it takes a few days to figure out. Or you get sick in the middle of a reintroduction, and you're like, well, I don't know if corn's a problem. I got sick. So then you have to start over and do it again. And that's where the reintroduction, it's not crystal clear. And especially if you've got a lot of stress going on in your life, that can really muddle the picture as well. So it's a lot of patience and a lot of redoing it sometimes if you want a clearer picture. So you have to wait for at least 72 hours to see if those symptoms come up, and that's why you keep this journal, right? Because you're clearly going to have eaten other things in the meantime, but you only eat it 3 times a day that one day, and then you wait, right? And then it's out again for the remainder of that 72 hours. You track, you see if those symptoms that went away come back, joint pain, fatigue, GI stuff, whatever it is for you. If they do, okay, you're sensitive to the food. You've got an answer. It needs to be left out, right? If they do not come back, then then it's likely that you're not that sensitive to that food, which is great. Good news. And then the last part here is that we need to wait the minimum 72 hours before you try another food. However, if you still have symptoms from this flare-up that happened with this food, and it can go on for a while, it can go on for a week, you cannot reintroduce another food until you're back to the baseline, right? It's got to be kind of very scientific this way. Otherwise, you can cause, you're going to have a muddled reaction, right? You're not going to know what happened from this next food, or if it was the after effects of what was going on there on the last reaction. So again, patience and listening is really, really key with the reintroduction phase. And again, it is the hardest, and I think you can probably see why it's the hardest here. A lot of interpretation, a lot of listening, a lot of very specific things, but, you know, very worthwhile if you would really like to know, you know, what your intolerances or sensitivities are. And, you know, depending on the severity of reaction, that will tell you possibly how long you have to avoid things. You know, if it's severe, you might be away from them for months or years. If it's not as severe, it might be a few months, and then you can retest it again and maybe you'll be fine. And that's the beauty of healing up the GI. But it's a constant give and take and a constant kind of test and retest and see where you are and what happens. And just being willing to re-examine things, you know, especially even if things you felt like you could add in and then you start feeling bad again. You really, you know, it's not black or white. It's a very kind of gray area that just takes you learning about yourself over time. Okay, see, we're almost done here. So how to reintroduce, right, oh, I put in, sorry, this is the last one. Okay, so, right, like we said, results are not always clear, right? It can be a frustrating process, it can be a difficult process, but incredibly worthwhile to explore and maybe have relief from things that have been happening for your entire life and issues that you may have had since childhood. And I'm sure you know that, and I'm sure that's why you're watching these videos. And because the results aren't always clear and there's so many different hiccups, that's what I want to cover in my last video for you, where I'm going to talk about the most common hiccups and mistakes that I see people make in this process of understanding their sensitivities and tolerances, the elimination diet, reintroduction, the whole thing. So yeah, stay tuned for that next week. Okay guys, I just wanted to talk to you about my favorite books for the elimination diet and resources. So the first one is called The Elimination Diet. It's really lovely, really helpful, lots of great food information, lots of what we covered in the first video, but in text, so you can just read it and check it out. They take you through elimination and reintroduction. They have recipes in here. I love this couple. He is a nutritionist and she is a chef, so it's really great. They do a fabulous job. I love this book. It's on Amazon. It's really only about 16 bucks. Totally worth your time to check this one out. And then this is my other favorite one, which is by the same couple, the Whole Life Nutrition Cookbook. And it's focused on gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, and egg-free recipes. So major allergens are out. They even talk about fermented foods. They have everything you could possibly want in here. Breakfast, lunch, dessert, kids. I believe they have 5 kids, so they really do a lot of nutritional work for kids this way too. And they have a great blog as well, which is called Nourishing Meals, that I'll link to, along with one of my other favorite blogs for recipes called Tasty Yummies. They both do an amazing job. So you really want to set yourself up for success with a lot of great resources, and I found these 2 books incredibly helpful, and I hope you do too. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Take care. So this has been happening the entire time I've been filming. She's been sleeping in my chair. She's moral support through her relaxation ability, I think. I really hope I'm going to be able to talk to my patients tomorrow because my voice is starting to go. Or at least I have a good excuse, right? Educational videos, that's nice rather than like screaming at a concert, but that would be fun too.